Joel Embiid or Anthony Davis? Bam Adebayo or Domantas Sabonis? Those are just two questions we're going to answer here on today's show as it's week 5 of rankings. And today we're finishing off with our positional rankings at the center position. If you missed the first 4 positions, check out the channel, as every single week we're going through a new position and eventually capping off this stretch with a top 10 or top 25 overall player rankings in the NBA, which is going to be next week. So stay on the lookout for that. We're going to do a lot of controversy next week. But if you like consistent, high-quality sports and or fantasy football content, support us down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. We do 4 videos a week, and we haven't missed a day in about 10 months. So support us on the road to 500 subs. As always, timestamps will be in the description of the video. Without further ado, this is the Anomaly Podcast. Let's get into these big men. All right, we're going to start here with the criteria. As you see it on the screen now, the positions were based off of Basketball Reference. We're going to look at the overall skill of the player, the availability of the player, recent team success, their situation, individual stats, individual moments was the thing I wanted to include in these videos. Basically everything here over the last 2 to 3 years, with the majority being what we've seen as of late, as of this past year. But I am including the last 2 or 3 years of these people's careers. But now I will say, if a player is one spot or another spot, they are interchangeable, especially here in the top 5. But at the same time, I don't know. There's only 2 places on this list where I really could not decide. So I'll let you guys decide down below. But without further ado, let's get into some honorable mentions, as we're going to start here with Rudy Gobert, DeAndre Ayton, Nikola Vucevic, Jakob Poeltl, and Time Lord Robert Williams. As we'll start Rudy Gobert, as Rudy Gobert is still the best rim protector here in the NBA, and though minimal, his impact was felt in his first year in Minnesota. He led Minnesota to a top 10 defense last year, and it's crazy that his defense is kind of underrated now just due to how bad his image is and his offense is in the NBA. Regardless, he's an honorable mention. He was the hardest leave off of the top 10 list. DeAndre Ayton, he's a gifted two-way player that is still trying to figure out what he wants to be as a player. He's still super talented. He just needs to get out of his own head, because his mindset has really been the biggest thing holding him back from taking that next step as the number 1 overall pick formerly. Nikola Vucevic, very solid, skilled big that just got an extension, so shout out to him. But he does pretty much everything but defense there for Chicago. He's been in the top 10 for years and years over the last couple, just not this year, right? He's in the 10 to 15 range, right? Jakob Poeltl and the Time Lord, they're traditional bigs who bring big defensive effort for their teams, both really underrated and can single-handedly anchor a defense. Robert Williams was another of the hardest leave off of this list. Looking back, it's kind of hard. It's surprising I left him off the list. But Time Lord, nonetheless, super talented center. But moving over to the top 10 list, and I get it. You see it. Surprising. Don't click off the video. Let me kind of explain this to you. As this number 10 spot over these lists, I've kind of given the edge to maybe an up-and-coming player over some proven veterans, just to show some love to some of these young guys. But Alperen Sengun, I probably botched that. Regardless, Sengun, right? Center for the Houston Rockets. And again, this might be a surprise, but this young man is special. And I know the Rockets aren't winning a lot of games as of late, but just watch Alperen Sengun and his highlights, even just his highlights, if you haven't already. I mean, this is a young Turkish big with a lot of the same qualities as Nikola Jokic, just on a way lesser scale. But, I mean, he's a back-to-the-basket big. He has a lot of flair and skill as a passer and playmaker. He has a big frame as a screener, and there's a lot of indicators that he has a bright future to be a good defensive center, right? At least an above-average center. But offensively, defensively, it seems like he has it all in his game, especially, when he's paired with score-first players like Jalen Green and Jabari Smith. I think we can definitely see a leap in his game this upcoming year, also with veterans like Fred VanVleet. But now defensively, again, it's going to be an ongoing challenge for Sengun in his career. He can't really move his feet the best on the perimeter. But on the inside, I think he can hold his own, and I think we're going to see a big improvement from Alperen Sengun this year with the new head coach in Ime Udoka. I believe that's going to unlock a different side of his game, and I believe he's going to become more well-rounded than ever this year. And if you watch him, the eye test says he's a top 10 center in the game. and I think his potential is only higher than number 10. Moving over to number 9, we're going to go with Nic Claxton. This is the kind of center that every title contender wants on their team, as his presence is felt in the paint on both ends of the court. In the Nets, this is a team that looks completely different now than just a year ago, as Mikal Bridges is now their guy instead of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. But this is a team that, even though they're super starless, they are still competitive. A big part of that is because of Nic Claxton, as he's a big part of their future, and he's a defensive anchor who switches screens, protects the rim, and makes scoring on the Brooklyn Basket a total nightmare for opposing teams. He averages about 2.5 to 3 blocks a game. There's not a lot of people that are better than him at blocking the blocking shots and protecting the rim. But there's more to Nic Claxton than just protecting the rim and being a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, as his touch around the basket is above average, I'll say, and he can finish through contact, create second chance opportunities. He's a good offensive rebounder. Defensively versatile big men are critical ingredients here for winning teams in the NBA today, and Claxton's becoming one of the best there is. And I think now all he needs to do is work on his free throws and work on maybe extending his range, but that might just be a couple years away. But the free throws is the main thing I want to see improved from Nic Claxton, with his aggressiveness and how much he can be fouled next season. But Nic Claxton, I mean, he's traditional big. He's a defensive monster, and he's going to be for years and years for this Brooklyn team, as he's definitely a cornerstone next to Mikal Bridges going forward for Brooklyn. Moving over to number 8, the lights were too bright. That is the quote I'll always associate with this man. But Jarrett Allen, as a Cavs fan, I will never forget, again, that quote that he said in the playoffs as far as Madison Square Garden. Regardless, he's still a defensive anchor for a top 10 defense in the NBA, a defense that will probably be top 5 again next season. This is a guy that can hold his own on the perimeter at times, and while blocking and deterring multiple shots at the rim, he's one of the best on that side of the ball. You know, he's going to be in the Defensive Player of the Year candidacy for years and years. But to his credit, he's taken advantage of also having great playmakers throughout his career, whether if it was with D'Lo or now with Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. He's managed to average about 15 points for his career off of cuts, rolls, lobs, being one of the best screeners here in the NBA. I mean, this is an all-star just 2 years ago. And maybe he's too low on this list. Maybe as a Cavs fan, I'm not giving him his credit. But it's hard to forget that Mitchell Robinson single-handedly made Jarrett Allen not worth his contract, and it made him single-handedly, made me contemplate not having Jarrett Allen on this list, because Mitchell Robinson single-handedly outplayed Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen in that first round. I guess the lights were too bright, but to me, this rating might be a little too high. Moving over to number 7, it's going to be Myles Turner, and although he hasn't exactly dazzled us with a fancy play style, he's still a very highly productive NBA player who had a career highs across the board last season with Rick Carlisle taking over, as he had a huge season for the Pacers, which at one point this Pacers team was a top 3 seed in the Eastern Conference. Now, of course, that was before all the injuries and all the, falling down the rankings. But at the end of the day, this is a 7-foot big who carries the same exact skill set as the guy ahead of him, but he's a little bit more agile, as you can funnel drives towards him in the middle. He averages about 2.5 blocks a game. You can kick it out to him on the corner or on the perimeter, and he's ready to launch up an unblockable 3-point shot, as he shot about 37% on 4 attempts a game. So Myles Turner can do a little bit of everything for the Pacers team and any team here in the NBA. He can also hold his own on the perimeter defensively, which is not what we see often here from these bigger centers, right? But he can basically fit on any team and any scheme. And the championship head coach, former championship head coach Rick Carlisle, showed a lot of, he got a lot of potential out of Myles Turner last year. I believe he's going to come into this year a little bit more aggressive, and I think Carlisle can even unlock a different side of Myles Turner to get up to maybe a 20-10 stat line. But that's a big reason why I'm so high on Myles Turner, is because he does have the right coach now to push him to his limits and get him over the top as one of these mediocre big men to the elite big men in this game. Myles Turner, again, he's no Anthony Davis, he's no Joel Embiid, but he's pretty dang close to a top 5 center here in the NBA. Brook Lopez at my number 6 spots. And again, this is a guy that's on the downtrend of this list. He might not ever be top 5 again here in the NBA. But very few players in the world can have the defensive impact that Brook Lopez does. And fewer can shoot from the range and at the rate that he does, the way that he can, right? But now, Brook Lopez, I mean, he might not be suited to lead a team in scoring the way that he once did. By the way, he's still the Nets' all-time leading scorer, but he definitely makes life a lot more simpler for the stars in the NBA today by giving them the space to operate and having their back on the defensive end, as he makes the game so much easier in every single facet for a guy like Giannis Antetokounmpo. I mean, you can funnel drives towards that giant in the middle of the paint, as this is a guy that's been top 3 in the Defensive Player of the Year voting the last couple years. You can also kick it out to the perimeter or the corner, just like Miles Turner, and Brook Lopez can knock down an unblockable three-point shot about 40% of the time. So that right there is enough to be a top 5, top 6 center in the NBA. But then Brook Lopez at times will still give you a little bit of a nostalgic trip, as he can still put someone in the post, right? He can still back to the basket, and if the matchup calls for it, give you a bucket, right? But again, that's real flexibility in my eyes. Is you don't always have to be able to guard 1 through 5, but if you can do a lot of the little stuff at a very high rate, that's flexibility on a championship level team. And again, even if you're not expecting it from the slower-footed Brook Lopez, he can still get it done for you. And I mean, what else more can you want from a 7-footer who shoots threes, protects the rim, does about everything here for this Milwaukee Bucks team, which should be back and maybe better than ever next year. Moving over to the top 5, and this is where the debates start, as Bam Adebayo at my number 5 spot. Again, as I'm recording this, I honestly think he should be number 4. But again, the number 4 and 5 are the only 2 spots on this list that I could not come to a decision. They are interchangeable, so let me know down below. Let me know down below who you think is better, either 5 or 4. Let me know down below. But very few players are capable of guarding all 5 positions, as we just mentioned, without help. Bam Adebayo, I mean, he's one of the best at it here in the NBA, maybe the best, as he's a switch everything demon. I mean, he can run along. He can run with guards. He can run with big. He can out-muscle centers. Bam Adebayo can do a little bit of everything on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, he blocks shots, he rebounds, he anchors those patented zone coverages that Erik Spoelstra likes to run. But to me, what makes Bam Adebayo so unique and so valuable to this Miami Heat team is everything he can do for the Heat when he has the ball offensively, as he showed just in his playoff run that he's one of the best playmakers at the center position, if the world didn't know already. But at times, he goes through these spurts of aggression offensively where he can give you 20 to 25 points with, dominant, with ferocious dunks or lobs, or even having the touch with floaters, as we saw in the finals. He put up a lot of floaters there against Nikola Jokic. But this is a guy that his consistent aggression offensively is the only thing holding him back from maybe being a top 3 center in this league today. But if he plays next year, like this playoff run, and he doesn't kind of take a back seat like the Heat have been doing for the last couple years, this is a guy that will be in the top 3 conversation and maybe challenge that number 3 guy for a top 3 spot. Regardless, Bam has everything offensively, defensively, aside from maybe a 3-point shot. But again, if he just continues to improve on his game from last year, he's going to be in the top 3 conversation for the next couple years. Moving over to number 4, again, interchangeable. Let me know down in the comments which one you would prefer on your team. But I'm going to go with Domantas Sabonis, right? This is a perennial all-star who just helped the Kings end a 16-year playoff drought, and maybe that's the bias that is keeping me with Domantas at 4. But regardless, the Kings, I mean, they traded Tyrese Halliburton for this man. It was a very questionable trade at the time, but Domantas has done pretty much anything they could have asked for here in this first year and a half for the Sacramento Kings, as he's a 7'1" big. I mean, he just averaged 19 points, 12 rebounds, 7 assists, almost a triple-double as a 7-foot big, and he's doing all of that on good efficiency. So he did a little bit of everything for this emerging Kings team, and not to mention, I mean, he has a sense for angles like no other, as he's one of the best screeners in the league, up there with Draymond, right? But as a result, he's become a template of a player, kind of, for these foreign players that these NBA teams are kind of searching for here in the NBA drafts, as they want these versatile bigs that can do a little bit of everything. Now, defensively, Well, that's not his specialty, but he is respectable. Let's not disrespect Sabonis. He's respectable on the defensive side of the ball. As, look, teams are going to attempt to force him to move. They're going to attempt to get him out on the perimeter, take advantage of his slower feet. As the farther away from the paint, the less effective he gets defensively. But it could be the case that he's playing in the same era of a guy like Nikola Jokic, a guy of comparable size and skill who do a lot of the same things, but just significantly better for Nikola Jokic. I think those two guys playing in this era kind of affects our appreciation for Domantas Sabonis. Either way, I think he's found a home with the Sacramento Kings, and he might be lighting this beam so often next year that it's not as special as it once was. I don't think anything can replicate this past year, where it's not often where you can end a 16-year playoff drought. But shout out to Domantas Sabonis. I mean, you can argue him at 5 or 4. I really don't have a preference, to be honest with you. But moving over to the top 3, and it's set in stone. It is starting with Anthony Davis. And it's crazy to say that this dude has already been in the league for a decade. But here we are. 10, 11 years later, this is a guy that's an All-NBA 75 member, one of the 75 greatest players to ever play this game. So shout out to Anthony Davis. It's just crazy. I remember growing up playing those old 2Ks, 2K11, 2K12, and you create your My Player, and you're facing Anthony Davis in like the showcase, the summer league, to get drafted. And now, 10, 11 years later, I'm grown, and this guy is an All-NBA 75 member. Kind of crazy how time flies. With a 7'6" wingspan and elite agility, AD is quite literally a physical specimen, and his talent backs that, making him one of the best players in this league over the last decade, reasonably so, as he made it All-NBA 75. But on offense, Anthony Davis at times can be a knockdown shooter. Now, those numbers have fell over the years ever since leaving New Orleans. Regardless, if his shot isn't falling, he can still punish mismatches in the post. Any big guarding him is really a mismatch, as he can slash from the perimeter. He has the touch to shoot the fadeaways and the floaters. He can do lobs, cuts. He can do everything offensively as well as facilitate. I think facilitating is one of the most underrated parts of Anthony Davis's game. The all-around skill set for him makes him one of the game's best offensive bigs, but that's not even where his talent lies, right? He's most known for his defense. On defense, this is a guy that is a defensive anchor in himself for a top 10 defense, right? And that's not an opinion. That's a fact of life. Shout out to LA Knight. But just over his time in Los Angeles with the Lakers, when he's on the floor, the Lakers are a top 5 defense, and that's with Frank Vogel, or that's with Darvin Ham. This team, when he is on the court, is a top 5 defense, and that's not including the elite defenses in New Orleans, right? Or any other place he's been, which has only been 2 places. But throughout his entire career, he's basically been a top 10 defense in himself. So you can't give him enough credit for that. But after being a decade in the league, he can go down as one of the greatest defensive players to never win a Defensive Player of the Year. At least that's what it looks like as of now. And a lot of that comes down to his health, as he never plays enough games to win that award. Regardless, his biggest downfall over the years, as we know, again, is going to be his health, as he's appeared in over 70 games in a single season just twice in his 10-year career. But even with that said, he's still one of the game's best players to be drafted, as he was a former number 1 overall pick to the New Orleans Hornets. But Anthony Davis, Lakers big, and this might be the last year with LeBron and AD in LA. So we're going to have to see if they can put it all together to win another ring. But moving over to number 2, we have Joel Embiid, the reigning, defending MVP of the league, who just averaged 33 points, 10 rebounds, 2 blocks, a couple assists as well. Embiid does everything you would expect from a player that's 7 foot, 280 pounds, right, as an offensive center. But on offense, he adds something new to his game every year, as he's turned himself into a perennial MVP candidate. He's added one post move after another, drop steps, fadeaways, rip throughs, hook shots. This guy has managed to improve his interior game each and every year of his career, and that's not including the improvements in his outside game, his perimeter game, as he's adding step backs to his game, as he's adding the pump fakes and the pull-ups into his game. Embiid is as fluid as you can get at his size, at his position. He's kind of like a wing in a center body. So super talented at the center position, right? But this past season, I mean, Joel Embiid shot more efficiently from mid-range than he ever has before. And whether he's attacking off the dribble or posting up with his back to the basket, he's bound to draw double teams, and he's going to draw fouls all game. We know that one of the biggest disses on Joel Embiid is that he does search for foul calls. But regardless, he's still one of the best offensive talents in the game, regardless if he foul baits there in the NBA. But now on defense, Joel Embiid is a towering presence. Again, just like Anthony Davis, he is a top 10 defense in himself. He is quite literally a defensive anchor. He blocks shots at a high rate. He uses his length to contest almost every shot. And again, he can hold his own on the perimeter with the right matchup. But again, he lacks effort at times. But his workload offensively, kind of justifies why he lacks effort on the defensive side of the ball. Regardless, Joel Embiid is a force who's going to be one of the game's most complete players for the next couple years. And he's going to be a perennial MVP candidate for the next couple years as well. But right now, I think the biggest question for Embiid is getting a championship, not an MVP award. So we'll have to see as his focus changes or his mindset changes going forward. Regardless, the number one spot, there's no shocker here. It is going to be Nikola Jokic, the Serbian center. But Nikola Jokic is maybe a once-in-a-lifetime basketball phenom, as he's a back-to-back MVP coming into a season who he should have won his third straight in this past season. But a lot of that could be due to voter fatigue, or maybe it's a narrative-seeking human being that wants to give Joel Embiid the award. Both of those could have played a part in why Joel Embiid got the award last year over Nikola Jokic. But this year, out of all the years that he's proved, he's maybe the best player in the world, as this is a hyper-efficient big, scoring-wise, who makes everyone around him better, as he's the game's best playmaker in the NBA at 7'1", right? That doesn't come around often, but he's also a guy that makes certain reads or passes that us fans or coaches or teams, we can't comprehend it until we watch it back after the game, or we watch the film the next morning. He makes these reads where it's like he's always 2 or 3 steps ahead of the defense. And again, speaking of defense, his defense is also underrated and misunderstood, in my opinion. I mean, Jokic this year has improved dramatically defensively. Jokic is Denver, right, in my opinion, as he brought them their first title in franchise history this past year. He's now entered the conversation for a top 10 center of all time. Even if he retired today, I think he's in that conversation. No doubt, one of the game's best players. And if his teammates can stay healthy, as this year was the first year that happened, he might be winning a couple more championships here in Denver for the next couple years. But again, we'll have to see next week if I have him as the best rated player in the league. That I'm not going to spoil that, but he's definitely a top 2 player. I'll give you guys that much. But regardless, let's recap here as my 10 through 6 goes as follows. Again, we like to give this number 10 spot to some of these up-and-coming players, like to show them some love going into next year. So I went with Alperen Sengun. My number 9 through 6 is Nick Claxton, Jarrett Allen, Miles Turner, and Brook Lopez. My 5 through 1, again, 4 and 5 are interchangeable. 5 is Bam Adebayo. Number 4 is Domantas Sabonis. 3 is Anthony Davis. 2 is Joel Embiid. And number 1, no shocker, is Nikola Jokic, the best center in the game. I've been preaching that here for about a year. Regardless, moving over to around the NBA, as that was our centers list. Thank you for all the support on all 5 positions. We are now going to close off next week with some with our top 10 or top 25 players in the league. And then we won't have any basketball content until probably about late September, early October. Regardless, around the NBA, the Clippers and Kawhi Leonard they're in no rush to seek an extension, as both sides have a general understanding that they haven't won a championship. They haven't gotten what they wanted to done, which is win a championship, and Kawhi hasn't been healthy for a large part of that. So we'll have to see, if there's ongoing questions this year, right? We'll have to see if Kawhi is actually going to return to LA, or maybe he's going to get shipped off or sign elsewhere after next season. That'll be something interesting, as Kawhi is still a top 10, top 15 level player here in the NBA. Udonis Haslem, you see the picture on your screen, of course. He has announced his retirement after 20 years with the Heat officially, as he was once signed as an undrafted free agent in 2003. he would go on to play in almost 1,000 career games here for the Miami Heat. He's a Heat legend for sure. He's going to have his jersey retired, and it's not going to feel right having the 40-year-old coach on the bench for this Miami Heat club. But again, the Heat, in other news, have also discussed a possible reunion with another veteran in the foreign guard in Goran Dragic. It'll be interesting to see if they bring him back. But Ben Simmons, in other news, he is back to 100%. Again, we've heard this the last 2 years, but Ben Simmons, according to reports, is back to 100%, and he could start at point guard next year for the Brooklyn Nets. In all honesty, I just hope he's back to himself. I don't care if he's at 80%, 90%, 100%, and 30%, right? I just hope Ben Simmons is back to himself as when healthy. I mean, this is a guy that's a perennial all-star, one of the best players in the league on both sides of the ball, at least defensively. But I just hope he comes back with some confidence and some aggressiveness to get back to the Ben Simmons that we once knew there in Philadelphia. The last bit of news here is that the Milwaukee Bucks now have a chance to compete for a title next year. You're hearing it first as they re-signed the GOAT, Thanasis Antetokounmpo. Of course, that's a joke if you didn't catch on to the sarcasm, but Thanasis is re-signing with the Bucks. It helps when your brother is maybe the best player in the league, doesn't it, right? A couple $1 million every single year of your life just because your brother is one of the best we've ever seen. Regardless, that's going to do it for today's show, as I just realized that we kind of flew through today's episode, as we were only like about 30 minutes into the show and we've already got through our rankings. But again, it's the off season. It's the kind of the dead part of the year. Football is starting up Thursday. But again, speaking of football, I mean, Wednesday and Friday, if you guys didn't know, we've been releasing fantasy football content for the last 4 or 5 months. So if you guys are interested in fantasy football, it's the peak season of it. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We release 2 videos a week for the last 5 or so months, and we're not going to stop here as we're just getting started with the season coming up. And then, of course, sports content. You know, Tuesdays and Thursdays for the last 10 months. We haven't missed a day. We've been releasing new, the latest and greatest sports content here on the channel. And regardless, I mean, next week we have some controversy coming up here with the top 25 players in the league. Tons of great content here coming up here on the channel. But regardless, we're on the road to 500 subscribers on the channel, so if you enjoyed it at all, go ahead and support us down below. Again, I want to remind you guys, because if I remind you, it seems like our numbers do better. But again, regardless, we'll see you guys tomorrow with some fantasy football content. Let me know down below, you know, what you agree with, disagree with the list, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. Stay happy, stay healthy. We're out.